Hi everyone, welcome to Human. I'm your host Sarah Schur, and this is the very first season of the University of Manitoba's Anthropology Department podcast, where I hope to explore the topic of anthropology through conversation with faculty and students so that everyone can have a better understanding of what anthropology is and can be. This podcast was also created on a campus located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people in the homeland of the Métis Nation. As a podcast dedicated to anthropology, this project is also a part of the Anthropology Department's commitment to community engagement and research on the rich, diverse, and multifaceted ways of being human. Once again, I'm your host Sarah Schur, and this is Human. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on today's episode of Human. I'm Sarah, and I'd like to give a warm welcome to my guest, Dr. Rumel Halder. Dr. Halder is a socio-cultural anthropologist whose interests lie in studying identity, transnational migration and globalization, international development, post-colonialism, and the political economy, with a focus on South Asia. Dr. Halder is also a sessional instructor here in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Manitoba, but previously also worked in Bangladesh as an assistant professor in anthropology. Dr. Halder, it's so nice to be able to speak with you today. So thank you for being part of this podcast.
Thank you so much, sir, for having me. It's my honor.
Oh, but I guess I should also say perhaps it's nice to be able to chat with you today outside of class because I am currently in one of your courses, Globalization and Transnational Migration. And we often have discussions in that course about anthropology and specifically that topic. So before we begin discussing maybe like what your research has been in anthropology, I was wondering if we could begin with how your interest in anthropology began. I know you are originally from Bangladesh and, the education process is maybe a bit different there where you have to decide really early on.
Well, that's a good question, actually. I didn't have any clue about anthropology, neither me nor any of my family members. They didn't heard anything about anthropology. I was a pure science student, like physics, chemistry, math guy. And in Bangladesh, as a guy, you have two options. Either you have to be a doctor or you have to be an engineer. Others, no choices, right? Your marriage market will be so low if you do not be a doctor or engineer. So after finishing my, here you call it high school education. We call it college education. That is 12 years, and it's a British system. We are colonized by England for 200 years. So still British legacy existed. So after finishing my high school in Bangladesh, you have to write admission tests for entering to universities. So I wrote admission test a couple of universities. And I studied Jahangirnagar University. It's a public university close to Dhaka, the capital in Bangladesh. So I able to secure seats in, I think, 3 departments: political science, history, and philosophy. And fourth, the dramatics. That's the program I want to be, actually.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
But I'm the only son of my parents, and the dramatics department said, no, this is not something we can do because your parents going to take you from here and we're going to lose one seat that we do not want that. And it is quite expensive for us. And then I talked to one of my cousin's friend. He was a faculty in the Department of English, and I didn't have any clue. And I also had a chance to go to anthropology. Then he said, why history, why philosophy, go to anthropology. So I took that path. I just listened and entered into anthropology. But as a high school student or college student, I love to debate about politics, culture, history, I grew up with, playing a little bit of music or acting, all kind of stuff. So when I entered into, anthropology department, I enjoyed, actually. I feel like, probably I've been waiting for these issues in my life. I didn't have a chance, So I didn't have any plan or I didn't know anything what would be my career path. Just I followed that my cousin's friend and I jumped in anthropology.
Oh, interesting. And I have recently heard in class you speak about your research. So since then, you have traveled to Canada and I mean, you got your master's and doctorate in Canada as well, and then you started teaching as a professor in anthropology. So could you share a bit about what your research in anthropology has been on?
Well, that's a good question. Like, as I said, when I entered into universities, in the third year in Bangladesh, I had a chance to do some ethnographic research in anthropology. Like, you have to go to a community, spend some time. So, Sarah, in anthropology, most of the anthropologists, they pick their research topic from their lived experience. Many ways, probably someone enter into the poverty, someone enter into experience, racial discriminations or anything. So that is one way we find research project or research subject, or we do literature review. And when you do undergrad programs and you study lots of stuff, and based on that, you probably find your, research topic. For me, I grew up in a small town in Bangladesh, and it is by the side of the Meghna River, or it is one branch of Padma River, all the way from Himalaya to Bay of Bengal. So when I grew up in the small town, I found lots of people lost their home, because of riverbank erosion. So when I was a high school student or university student, I thought, well, these are the people all on a sudden they're displaced, because of natural calamities or disaster or riverbank erosion. And personally, I met some of my friends. They were, big farmer, like they probably have 100 or more acres of land. And within one night, they become a homeless or, landless. And they call it, they lost everything, So there is a saying in my own research I found, if you got fire, and your house burned, you get little bit of ashes. For riverbank erode people, they do not have anything. Everything gone, just water, right? So that actually forced me to start thinking about human displacement in response to, natural disasters. So that's the way I start my small research as a third-year university student or honors student. So that is my first anthropological work. Then in the master's program, I studied, by this time Bangladesh had a huge revolution. It's called microcredit program. And if you probably know, the guy name is Dr. Yunus. He was the founder of Grameen Bank, and he got Nobel Peace Prize. So first time in Bangladesh, women are given credit because it is a male-dominated society, and mostly upper class or middle class man or household head, we call it, mostly men, they are able to get finance or financial support from any formal institution, for example, banks. But women in the rural areas or, farmers, or we call them invisible peasants, they didn't have any access to any kind of financial, support or credit. They are not considered as credit worthy. So there's a huge program, microfinance program, and I try to understand whether this program being empowerment, that's another, indicators of social development. That's one of my areas of research. I try to understand whether this microfinance brings changes in women's life. So I studied in-depth ethnographic work in 2 villages in Bangladesh. And I found mixed thing, there are lots of changes happen. At the same time, I also found the microfinancing organizations in Bangladesh, they are charging huge amount of interest. Sometimes it's 33 to almost 48% interest, which is crazy. But it is different than, or it's better than traditional money lending system. So traditional money lending system, before harvest, for example, $100, a farmer borrowed after 4 months after harvest, $200. It's crazy. So that was my research. So I studied. And another aspect I would say in Bangladesh, the anthropology as a discipline emerged or established by international developmental organization, World Bank and USAID, Ford Foundation, British Council. These are the people, they founded anthropology program in Bangladesh. Therefore, social development is key because they needed, a cultural broker, I would say, like UN organization, developmental organization. They have development programs for rural Bangladesh or Bangladesh as such, but they didn't have local expert who can translate, local perspective and communicate with international organization. So that's quite interesting. Like if you see many in Canada, probably it was not the case, So our anthropology department actually established by multinational corporations or, global developmental organizations. So I'm product of that, arena and that perspective. So social development was key in anthropological research. And we always hope that after graduation, I'll work for any non-profit organization or multinational organization. And I did, basically. I worked for Save the Children, USA Fund. I was a researcher. And later I worked for United Nations, like UNICEF as a consultant. I also worked for Asian Development Bank as a consultant. So developmental perspective is huge in Bangladesh, and most of the social anthropologists or cultural anthropologists we hired in those arenas. And some of the few people, they're able to teach in a public universities. So that's I grew up in a middle class families, and I did well for strange reasons in my undergrad program. And I had an opportunity to teach in a public university. So in Bangladesh, what happened, like you have to stood first class first and second. So I was second, or, in the top ladder, whatever. So I switched my Save the Children position and start teaching in a public university as a lecturer initially. But it was painful for me, My salary go almost 50 or more than 50% down because but my parents wanted to be university professor, and I love to teach, and so that's the journey. Well, so then just Bangladeshi master's degree is not enough to pursue your academic career. So I was looking for what are the avenues I have. So by this time, Ford Foundation, they have some fellowship in my department at Jahangirnagar University for the applied anthropology program. So I was given that opportunity, and I got the fellowship from that program. And I was accepted at Memorial University, Newfoundland, St. John's. So that's my journey to Canada. I was looking for other options, probably Australia. I was also looking for America, but for strange reason, it didn't work out. And I had a very good communication with my supervisor at Memorial, Dr. Wen Five. So his communications, his way of interacting, everything. That time, first time in Bangladesh, we got internet. So it's a dial-up, we composed the letter, then I plugged in by telephone, and there's a ting ding ting ding 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 sound, and then we connect. So it's another word. Anyway, so I got the offer and came to Memorial. So all the way Bangladesh to Newfoundland, right? It's quite a journey, and for a guy like me, and not many brown people that time in Newfoundland. So it's quite interesting. Sometime in the mall, elderly woman stopped me and touched my hand and say, "Gentlemen, you have a wonderful complexion." and then I laughed, and so I enjoyed my academic journey at Memorial. It was quite challenging. I didn't have computer my first term. I used to spend most of my time in the lab, and I didn't know how to type, very speedy ways. But I survived in the winter and all kind of stuff. And
I was going to ask what your experience was like for winter. Was that your first winter experience?
That was my first winter, and that was my first experience observing snow, I'm saying. That's quite interesting. Like, as I said, I grew up in Bangladesh, and I grew up in a Christian family. My mom was a Protestant Christian, and lots of missionaries used to come to my town, and they're all from Australia and New Zealand, and some of them from England too. So sometimes I saw pictures, and their wall is a top of the mountain, and they have mountain is covered by snow. And Bangladesh is very hot in the summertime, plus 35, 40 temperatures. And I always wonder, wow, these people are so lucky. If you go to the mountain with a cup of milk and sugar, it turned into the ice cream, because that time I thought this is probably the best something in this world you can have, is ice cream. But my perspective changed when I come to Canada. Well, that having snow and cold is not always fun,
Yeah.
Ice cream is good, but not like that, But, I survived. And in Newfoundland, I had wonderful friends and the warm friend, I would say, and I was cared by my friends, and that was quite helped to survive. One of my friends, Jill Ellison, she did later PhD in anthropology, and the day first snowfall happened, she didn't tell anything. I was in my office, and she said, Rumel, I'll be coming to pick you up within 15 minutes. Just come to outside. I just thought, okay, we'll probably go for coffee. And then when I come to outside, I saw everything is white. And I was jumping on the snow, and I have few papers in my hand, and it's everywhere. And Jill was laughing inside the car. And she said, that's the reason I came, and I wanted to see how you react. Yes.
Oh, that's a sweet story.
And my professors, they loved me. I don't know. So one of the Bangladeshi person came to Newfoundland, I think 1971, 72. He was my prof, Dr. Helaluddin Khan Arifin. He recently died. But after that, probably in 2001, the next Bangladeshi guy at Memorial was me in the Department of Anthropology. And that time, one professor who taught me research methodology, he used to ask me, who is the better student, you or Arifin? I said, Arifin was my prof, So, yeah. Then after finishing my master's at Memorial, I have lots of story about Memorial. I do not know. I enjoyed my journey there. So I finished it was 1 year master's program, but I had to write a small, monograph thesis. And I wrote about arsenic contamination in ground level water in Bangladesh, but I looked at from political ecology, political economy perspective. So I finished my master's, and the day I left, and another interesting story, the day I started my first day of my class, that was 9/11.
Okay.
And the whole incident happened in Newark, and I was staying in a dorm with 3 Arab guys. They're all from Palestinian. I didn't have any clue what's going on. I didn't have TV. I just came all the way from Bangladesh, and even in the fall, I used to wear winter jacket. So that's my first day, and then all planes landed in Newfoundland, almost 5,000 people. We also opened up our all the halls and everything, and city jumped in. People supported them anyway. So that's another interesting story. Then I came to Toronto, and as a Bangladeshi person, nobody know about Newfoundland or St. John. So I came to Canada, and I wanted to prove my friends back home that I came to Canada and study. So only I can prove that if I take a photo in front of Niagara Falls. So I wanted to come to see Niagara Falls, and I came to Toronto. I have some families, like my cousins. So they picked me up from the airport, and I had a wonderful experience, or I would say this is the first time I see hundreds of brown people outside of brown land, And I find, is it Canada? Because I thought probably my plane landed in a different airport somewhere in India. But it shouldn't be in 3 hours, right? So it was fascinating, because in my experience in Newfoundland, it's a small Irish, not many multicultural individuals in that city that time. So it fascinated me, and I found, wow, that's quite interesting. Then I had a chance to meet lots of Bangladeshi families in Toronto. Then I decided that time, if I had a chance, if I pursue my higher studies, I will study immigrants, South Asian or Bangladeshi immigrants to Canada. So, because when I first came, as an anthropologist, it's an anthropological mindset, we call it. All on a sudden, certain things fascinated you. You want to see certain ways why people look certain things, do certain things, say certain things. So I was observing, listening stories, and I thought, wow, could be quite interesting, and try to know why people migrate, how their life, and all kind of stuff. So that leads me to my PhD research. So as I said at the beginning, our lived experience actually shape how we study our research or research subject, or how define a research project. That another scholar, Eric Wolf, probably you are familiar, he migrated from Europe, and he came to America, and he also said his journey in the Second World War shaped him as an anthropologist, and he spent a few months in the concentration camp in England, and he met all these Marxist scholars, and then came last probably ship he took all the way to America. Then he entered into the war. what I'm trying to say that I didn't plan that I'll come to Manitoba or I'll pursue that direction. So I always say I was born in a small town. It's called Modbaria in the southern part of Bangladesh. It's a small town. But my journey from Modbaria to Manitoba, I didn't plan. That's for sure, but it happens.
So you ended up researching immigrants in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Could you expand maybe a little bit more on the specifics of who and what you were studying?
Well, that's a good question, sir. Well, after finishing my master's, I went back to Bangladesh. And then after 2 years later, in 2004, I came to Winnipeg. And then I started my PhD program. I finished my coursework. But as I said, that I had an intention to study migration. And I wrote 1 page or 2 pages of proposal. And I sent to my supervisor, ries. And I should tell another story. My master's supervisor, he met ries and in a CASCA conference, is a Canadian Anthropological Sociological Association's annual conference, because to pursue higher studies in anthropology, you have to find a professor who has some understanding about the culture or the society you want to study. That's why I didn't able to pursue my PhD at Memorial, because there's no expert there, or most of the professors, they mostly work in Europe or Ireland or Nova Scotia, that area. So my supervisor, when 5 at Memorial, he met my UFM supervisor, and he said, if you do not take Rumel, so Rumel cannot pursue his PhD. So anyway, but by this time, Dr. ries, my supervisor at University of Manitoba, almost retired. He said, no, I'm not going to take any more PhD students. So anyway, after that meeting, he changed his mind, and I was his last student. So I took anthropology classes here, and I also, the course you are taking, I also took similar kind of course and migration and globalization. And at the same time, I would say that my lived experience also forced me to think about identity. I wanted to I studied Bangladeshi immigrants, how they negotiate their identity in a transnational settings or multicultural settings. So why I am looking at identity. Another reason is my identity in Bangladesh as a religious minority. I grew up in a school, in a town, or wherever I was considered as religious minority based on my religious identity. Protestant family, and Bangladesh predominantly Muslim society, 95%, and 4% people probably Hindus, and 1% Christians, Buddhists, and more than 35 ethnic minorities. So I belong to 1% categories. That's one thing. And I also I also grew up in a mixed religious family, dad from Hindu background, mom from Christian background. And growing up in a school among 1,200 students, I'm the only quote-unquote Christian student. Okay. So all kind of aspects actually shaped me to think about how this group of people define their identity. And when I came to Canada, first time I realized that there's a huge segregation between Hindus and Muslims and Christians in an immigrant settings. But I didn't study that much, or I just looked at all kind of aspects. So in my PhD research, I looked at how this identity shaped. People carry their memories, their stories, their religious ethnic identities, and how they negotiate those identities, how they connect among each other. So these kind of questions I asked in my research when I did my PhD in Toronto among Bangladeshi immigrants. So one of the key aspects was, colonialization. Like I looked at how colonial history, 200 years of history, how it shaped Bengali, the ethnic identity, and then after post-colonial settings like 1947 to 71, that's the period I looked at this. Islamic identity also shaped very much as a nationalistic identity. Then we have lots of movements and revolutions. So, for example, Bengali as an ethnic group, the country I came from, we fight for protecting our mother tongue. In 1952, there is a huge protest happened because when British left India, Bangladesh used to consider that time as East Pakistan, and today's Pakistan we used to call West Pakistan. So we become another colony of West Pakistan. So West Pakistani people actually introduced Urdu should be the national language of Bangladesh. Then Bangladeshi intellectual students, they protested. So police shot more than 200 individuals. And so this is the first time in human history, probably, a small ethnic group that shed blood for protecting their mother tongue. So that kind of movements leads to an independence war in 1971. And then 9 months war, 500,000 women were raped by Pakistani army, almost 3 million people were killed. So then we become Bangladesh as an independent nation. So I bring those stories, and when migrants come to Canada, whether they bring those history and how they negotiate with Pakistani immigrants, how they define their religious identity, how they define, or many Muslims or they used to consider that majority, or they never felt that as a majority they are privileged in their life. But when they come to Canada, first time they probably experience their ethnic minorities or visible minorities, right? And the pain of becoming a minority. So in my PhD research, I pay attention to how majority and minority issues people carry in a new location, and based on that, they define their social space and how they define their cultural identity, how they negotiate. So sometimes they crack jokes, sometimes, they do not want to hang around among each other. All kind of aspects are important to look at. Because sometimes we think that immigrants, they bring similar kind of stories. That's not true. Even they come from the same cultural groups, we have different stories based on our religious identity, sometimes class identity or gender identity. Female experience could be different than the male's experience, right? Or as a elite person or rich person from Bangladesh or any parts of the world, your journey to new location would be different. So those diversities are important in anthropological research, to understand them. Complexity, history, and human diversities. Those are interesting way we see migration, or we see people, or we see complexity. It's not the people come as a homogeneous entity. It's not always true, right? I need many hours. I do not know how much time you have. I can tell 4 days about all my stories.
No, that was great. We often talk about identity within anthropology. And how would you say your own identity as someone from Bangladesh studying other Bengali people, as well as being in the Christian minority within your own home country? Do you think that would have influenced your acceptance within these immigrant communities in Toronto at all, or changed the way that your research?
Well, as an anthropologist, as a Bangladeshi, it's my national identity. I carried Bangladeshi passport. Bengali is my ethnic identity because of my linguistic orientation. And my religious identity, obviously, is a minority identity, that's for sure. But all these issues came to my research in the discussions. People asked questions, I answered. But in many ways, I was insider because I could speak Bengali, or I carried Bangladeshi passport. I have, that is my insider perspective. At the same time, I was also outsider because of my class, I was a PhD student, or I used to teach in a public university that uphold my status as a professor, or my upper middle class background, or my academic journey. I was affiliated with an university as a PhD student. So these are my outsider perspective. So both are important in my research, and both are contested in different ways. In many ways, I was way welcome. At the same time, people also ask my, religious identity, or sometimes they ask my caste identity, or, whether I belong to, because my surname Halder can be, there's a, if you know about the caste system, there are 5 castes. I'm not Brahmin, but Kshatriya, or I can be scheduled caste. So people ask me which one I belong to, right? Or my name, Rumel is not proper Christian name, quote unquote, or English name. I'm not Peter or John, or, And Halder is more surname. Mostly Hal means plow, Dar means who control plow. So so I came from a farming community, right? So, or my grandparent was a priest or a school teacher and a farmer. So all these things actually, in different ways, my identity shaped, negotiated in this new location. Or obviously, as a male, I had lots of privilege, to study male migrants. At the same time, I missed women's perspective of life because many Bangladeshi women, they maintain parda or niqab, or their space is very gendered in many ways. So I didn't able to observe those things, right? But I explained that in my research.
Could you maybe speak a bit on how the communities that you were working with and creating relationships with, some of the findings of your research and how Bengali immigrants have negotiated their own identities in space within Canada?
Well, that's a good question. I looked at gender perspective, I looked at religious perspective, class perspective when you look at the identity issues. But one thing I should say, religion plays a significant role among Bangladeshi immigrants. And it's not just I mostly focus on Bangladeshi Hindu, Christian, and Muslims. I didn't find many Buddhists, or I didn't pay attention to ethnic minorities, right, or indigenous communities. So I found like all three groups, Bangladeshi Christians, Hindus, and Muslims, they took religion as a shield to define their new identity in a Canada, or protect their identity, because they think Canada is a strange land, or Canada is, lots of impure space in a different way. So lots of alcoholism or gayism or lesbianism or, something they never experienced back home, right? Or sometimes we think like migration is it's a journey, but it's called class degradation, right? So you are back home, you are a doctor, now you are not a doctor anymore. So you have a different class position, but in a new location you do not have that. So in order to face all kind of uncertainties in their life, they took religion as a shield, right? So to protect their identity, I'm talking about all three. I found that Bangladeshi immigrants, they pick religion as one of the key bases of defining their identity, along with their ethnic identities. But I think ethnic identity turned into second categories. Rather than religion, they wanted to be a proper religious individual. So Hindus become super Hindus, or they start practicing Hinduism closely. Muslims also become super Muslim. They try to prefer to pray 5 times or go to the Friday prayer, eat halal food. Many of my respondents, they didn't bother to do any of those things back home, but within 6 months of their migration, they changed their perspective. And Christians, another funny story is we have Bengali name and we also have English name for Christians. So I found most of the Bangladeshi Christians, they hide their Bengali name. They all turn into, Joseph, Peter, Dorothy, Mary, right? I said, who are these people? I'm just joking, because they think they feel comfortable that we are Christians. Canada also Christian country, quote unquote. So probably, they can challenge their minority identity in a new location to picking up English name or to proclaim themselves they are Christians, because that's the way within their community they probably challenge dominant, Muslims, or now it's a Christian country, so we are powerful, quote unquote. I'm saying. So that's another aspect. At the same time, we also see cultural issues also important. Ethnic identity. Bengali migrants, they celebrate New Year's Day, celebrate national events. If in Winnipeg we have a monument in a Kirchbig Park, and it's the monument based on International Mother Language Day. So it's I think one of the important sculpture in Canadian perspective, I would say. So we see this kind of events like Bengali immigrants, they celebrate birthday of Rabindranath Tagore. He is one of the Bengali Nobel laureate poet, and Independence Day or Victory Day, Bengali New Year's Day. So all these days they celebrate in a new location to define their identity. Eat Bengali food and wear clothing and stuff. Or lots of musicians, actors, they are also visit on and off. That's kind of transnational exchange also happening, or watching Bengali movies, going to a theater, all kind of stuff they do. Or immigrants, parents force their kids to go to Bengali school or learn Bengali or how to read and write. So this kind of initiatives also there. So one way or another to define their space, define their identity. Don't be Canadian. Or one of my respondents said, when you come to Canada, when you come to my home, you speak Bengali, right? My home is Bangladesh. outside, whatever you do, you can do. So this kind of interactions is very defining your identity. There are so many strategies or negotiating strategies immigrants pick. Either food is one of them, right? Eating local food, or wearing dresses, speaking languages, or visiting, or sometimes learning Arabic or Sanskrit, or religious rules and regulations.
In terms of the transnational experience, would you say that like identity is not just about conserving your culture from your home, but also incorporating and mixing cultures and sharing of traditions? And
well, again, it depends on if it is second generation or third generation immigrants. They are different stories. But in the first generation, what I observe in my research, I see less mixing happen.
Okay.
One of the key reasons, they are all fighting to survive in a new location. So
as a minority.
As a minority or economic minority, like you came to a new country, you have to pay your bills, you have to work 4 jobs, So you do not have chance to go to watch a Jets game, or you cannot afford it, right? Or as an individual, for example, it is almost impossible to mix with other, or in my own research experience or lived experience, I would say, I'm blessed that I came to universities. I have graduate friends or students who come to Canada. They have different stories. But migrants who come as a family or as an individual, they might, it is almost difficult for them or impossible to mix and understand or blend all kind of aspects, because survival is important aspect. So that's one thing I found, that there's some structural inequalities. If you want to mix with others, it should be your initiative. There is no programs, I would say, or state-funded programs where you can go to a Jets game, or you can attend a concert, or you can do something fun. Those are expensive. You have to buy tickets and stuffs, and or so some cultural struggles also there, or embargo. For example, most of the Bangladeshis, they're Muslims. They do not drink officially. Many of them they do. Or food, like whether you can eat pork or not. That kind of issue is also important. So there's some purity and pollution perspective also there, like whether it is okay to hang around with others. I found like in the first generation of immigrants, they try to protect themselves. They are living in a bubble, or they hang around among each other, or they have their own small group, 4 or 5 families. Eventually, they become a very close connections among each other. That's the way they survive. So I don't see much happening in the first generation. In the second generations, probably, yes, they have more options to meet, or probably go to school, go to universities. They have the chance to meet new friends and stuff like that. So that is happening. But at the same time, first generation immigrants, they have their tendency to protect their identity. So they do not want to, melt it down. I'm saying, I want to keep my identity intact anyhow. So as I said in my discussion, that people probably practice religion to protect their identity, because Bengali ethnic identity is not that strong in many ways. If I pick Bengali or Bengali Islamic identity, probably stronger than, or they connect with the pan-Islamic, identity, or pan-Hindu identity, or Christianity. Obviously, like it's a privilege for many Bangladeshi Christians.
And I think in anthropology, we are focused on the differences between people, but differences in a way that's meant to kind of highlight the beauty of different cultures and different people around the world. So I guess in that way, when we're talking about people trying to protect their identities as migrants or immigrants coming to a new country, to a certain extent, that's what probably everyone would do if they were put into that situation of fighting for survival in certain respects. So I thank you for talking more about that. I was also wondering, your research on immigrants in Canada, is there something that anthropology can maybe contribute in terms of allowing others to learn more about the experiences?
Absolutely. Like if you look at the whole idea of globalization or transnational migration, like let's talk a little bit of globalization, because my research is very much grounded with the idea of globalization, post-colonialism, and transnationalism. So generally we think that globalization brings lots of positive stuff, and in different ways it is true, but everybody talks about globalization. If you go to Hollywood stars to clergy, man, everybody is talking about globalization. It's a buzzword nowadays. But we are losing the essence of globalization, I would say, more. But we think it's a part of neoliberal economy, expansion of market, and it creates opportunity and stuff like that. But anthropology, as a discipline, we want to see people behind the skin, like who are these people? Who are the beneficiaries? Who are the losers? Why people make that decisions? Why people like me all the way from Bangladesh coming to Canada, right? Or sometimes people take, dangerous journey, many of them die. I mean, boats are sinking, or people are shot by border guards.
Mm-hmm.
So human diversity, human dynamism, human challenges, or these are the anthropological work, or anthropologists pay attention to that. But at the same time, if you think Canada as a multicultural country, like when people come to Canada, they bring their stories, their life. I would say anthropology can help us to understand complexity of human life, complexity of every cultural groups, and when they come and how they negotiate. So in futures, there could be tensions among each other. So if we have clear understanding of those communities, it will help us to define immigration policies or social policies, and to build this country with all incorporating diversity. It is important to understand complex characteristics of each ethnic groups in different ways, because we all have our own stories, own struggles, and those are important stories. I would say anthropology helps us to understand, to put yourself in other people's shoes and see something from people's perspective. Because sometimes we see nowadays, if you look at the right-wing politics moving different directions, in North America and also in Europe. So acceptance is important question for many immigrants. Or another way we can see tolerance. So these two concepts are important to pay attention, and anthropologists, we are probably help to explain the complexity of migration. But anthropology, as I said, that we are not economists. Economists define the economic aspect of globalization. Political scientists probably talk about political aspect of globalization. We anthropologists, we pay attention to cultural aspect, like how cultural diversity, as we discuss identity, or different stories people have, their struggle, their challenges. We pay attention to gender, we pay attention to race, we pay attention to people we left behind. And people do not, when they come to another country, they do not, stop connecting. It's called, as we mentioned, we keep connecting to each other. So how these things shape my life and everything. So those stories are more important in anthropological research. And I would say that, in future, in a decades or more, 2 decades, you'll see lots of people, they are not European descendants, or, they look different, they smell different, they talk different with an accent like me. So how they are finding their space in Canada, and as a social scientist, we probably design the social policy. That's why anthropology is important, to understand the cultural diversity, inclusion, acceptance, and multiplicity, I would say. That's the beauty of a society. If you look at a house, there are 12 pillars, not 1 or 2 pillars, right? So we need many pillars to make the house stronger. So I would say acceptance is more, and that's the area anthropologists we can work,
Well, I thank you for sharing the perspective of anthropology and what it can bring in terms of thinking about globalization, because I think that is a topic that a lot of people are thinking about and seeing in terms of the mixing of cultures and just the increased connectedness of the world.
Globalization is not just container of goods and services moving different directions. That is happening, but people are also moving, in response. And who is losers? Like when I wear Bangladeshi made T-shirt in Canada and workers in Bangladesh getting 40 cents per hour, we cannot ignore that unequal exchange that is extending under neoliberal economy or post-Fordist model of economy.
Well, Dr. Halder, I thank you for this conversation. And I think we're kind of reaching the end of all the time that we have for today. But before we head out, what is one of your favorite foods or dishes to eat?
I love food. I love food. Any food you prepare with your heart, and I can eat. But favorite food is a good question.
I guess it doesn't need to be your favorite. It could just be something that you enjoy eating on a regular.
Well, I love Italian food, that's for sure.
Okay, yeah.
And another reason, when as a grad student, I work in an Italian restaurant,
Yeah.
So can you imagine Bangladeshi brown guy making Italian food? So Italian food I love. Nowadays I love sushis. I love Mexican food too, right?
I'm always looking for new sushi places to try because I also really like sushi.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
It was very
Thank you so much, sir, for welcoming me. And probably this is my first podcast, and I do not know. Thanks for having me. It was joy.
So this brings us to the end of this episode here on Human to Human. If you are new to anthropology, I hope you were able to gain a better understanding of what anthropology is and some of the topics that sociocultural anthropologists are interested in studying. I also hope you will tune into the next episode where I do an interview with Dr. Julia Gamble, who is an anthropology professor here at the University of Manitoba. In my interview with Dr. Gamble, we get to hear more about how different subfields in anthropology can be combined, such as the case of bioarchaeology, and we'll also hear more about Dr. Gamble's research interests in studying human teeth from the past, and the ways our dental enamel are actually very similar to tree rings in the way they store indicators of stress in our early life experiences. If you want to hear more from this podcast, Human to Human is available for listening on several platforms. We are on Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, as well as YouTube. If you like this episode or have any questions, it would be great to hear from you in the comment section. We also have an email that you can contact the podcast through, and that will be included in the description box down below. I would also like to give a special thanks to the people at UMFM for providing me with the space and equipment to make this podcast possible, as well as the Department of Anthropology for funding this project, and of course Dr. Laura Rosenoff-Gauvin, Dr. Warren Clark, and Dr. William Flynn at Carleton University, who have been some of my supporters in making this project happen. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you join me, Sarah Schur, on the next episode of Human to Human.